When we were little, we were taught the words reduce, reuse, and recycle. When I grew up, those are the most common words I've ever heard because I was taught that recycling is going to save the planet. Going green was one of my favorite things because everybody could do it and it was supposed to be really simple. When we were little, we saw that this logo would help save the planet in the sense of whatever we recycled would eventually be reused and thus somehow magically save the planet. We see things that are recycled on the screens today. We see glass bottles, we see aluminum cans, oil, and paper. Some of the very many things that are recycled in today's world because we believe that it will actually inevitably help our future. But in reality, is that actually the case? According to Forbes.com, dated January 17th in 2004, recycling in itself, although it has its many benefits, is actually not exactly helping as much as we once thought. On the contrary, recycling is detrimentally hurting our environment as well as our people. And when we really understand that, we have to take into consideration why we should reconsider our perspective on recycling. When discussing the topic today, we'll look at 3 key points of interest. First, we'll assess the economy and see how really, because our economy isn't that great, recycling as an expensive process and industry isn't exactly helping our economy. Second, we'll break it down and see how really recycling is actually promoting more risks and hazards for individuals and members of the community and how it isn't that safe. Then last but not least, we'll take into consideration the environment. Recycling is supposed to help the environment, but in reality, it's actually perpetuating the problem and somehow making things worse. Looking at our first point, we'll understand that really money is how the United States of America is really run on. But according to The Economist, dated January 3rd of 2014, America currently stands at a $17 trillion debt with foreign nations. With $17 trillion worth of debt, America cannot afford to waste money. And recycling, although it's supposed to have a good meaning and good value, it's actually wasting money in many ways. According to ehow.com, an environmentally friendly website, highlights how really recycling processes and industry is wasting annually $8 billion a year. Now, $8 billion a year is nothing compared to $17 trillion, but in a couple of years, it does add up. When we understand how really our economy is in a very fragile state, we have to understand that really we cannot afford to use money recklessly or spend it on things that will not essentially benefit us in the long run. We have to understand that recycling isn't an immediate consequence. On the contrary, in the long run, it adds up, and that is detrimental to our environment as well as our economy. But building on the idea of the economy, we have to take into consideration that because recycling has gotten more and more popular over the last 2 decades, according to ehow.com, the very same article highlights how Americans have increased their recycling numbers by nearly 25% within the last 2 years. Now, this 25% is a huge number because we're recycling a lot more in hopes of helping the environment and helping change the world. But in reality, this perpetuating of recycling things is actually hurting our economy because it costs even more money to create recycling plants as well as the process as a whole. When we understand how financially this recycling process isn't that good for us, we have to reconsider our plans and see how perhaps recycling isn't that great. But furthermore, we'll address the second point and see how really recycling in itself promotes problems, risks, and hazards. Now, recycling is supposed to be safe in the sense that we recycle things, we reuse them, and essentially we help save the planet. But when we look at the process closely, we have to understand how recycling is actually not good. Recycling is a simple process of breaking down the material that is once used for one product, breaking it down, and reusing it for another material. According to listverse.com, one of the most recycled products in today's country is aluminum cans, whether aerosol cans or soda cans. And because aluminum is such a valuable metal, we were able to reuse it many times. But in the very same listverse.com article, it highlights how because a lot of people recycle aerosol cans, the toxins and chemicals within these cans are actually recycled as well. So for example, let's say you use your hairspray in the morning and you recycle it. In the next year or so, that can be remade into a soda can, but it won't actually be that clean. The risk here is that it promotes a lot of safety hazards for people who drink soda, or even worse for babies. A study taken by Reuters.com on February 2nd of 2014 highlighted how a lot of products that had a lot of baby diaper materials were being recycled, but because they weren't efficiently cleaned, posed a lot of risks and threats and hazards to young children and babies as a whole. For example, we can take a look at the workers who work in the recycling plants. Many of these workers take long hours to distribute and sort through the recycled materials, but when they're exposed to such chemicals and toxins, it isn't safe for them. When we clearly understand how recycling is supposed to help the economy and help the world as a whole, it's actually damaging individuals and damaging members of the environment and community. This is a huge problem because we think recycling is good, therefore we do it more often. But as we do it more and more, it perpetuates the problem and creates risks for people as well as the environment as a whole. Which brings us to our last and perhaps most important point, the idea of saving the environment. When I was in first grade, our teacher nonstop emphasized the idea that recycling was supposed to help the environment in a sense of everything you did would make a difference. Now, I believed that for a long time, and my family and I recycled everything, from technology to electronics to paper and so forth. But in believing that recycling would help, we learned that recycling actually was damaging the economy, damaging the environment. So the picture on the left, those three cylinders and 3 plants that are actually spewing the most pollution are actually recycling plants. It's ironic because recycling is supposed to help the environment, as we're all told. But in reality, it's actually hurting the environment in many ways. According to Forbes.com, an article dated January 17th of 2004, in Washington State, the #1 pollution-producing plant is ironically a recycling plant. And furthermore, in many states, the #1 pollution-producing plants are recycling plants. With this cycle, we see how really recycling is actually perpetuating the problem. We believe that because recycling is supposed to help the environment, we keep doing it. But in reality, things like plants are actually causing more carbon emissions than we've ever thought of. With the second picture, we see how paper sludge is a huge problem. We like to recycle paper because paper is easily reused again and again and again. But the problem is that when paper is recycled, it actually takes all the toxins, such as the paper ink, the paper chemicals, and so forth, and puts them into a landfill. Now, although paper is reusable, and reusable, the most important thing to understand is that it actually hurts the environment because paper in itself is damaging the environment as well as the environment that we live in. Because we breathe in toxins, because we breathe in these pollutions, recycling in itself isn't that great. Now, as we combine all three points of analysis together, we clearly saw recycling admittedly does have its benefits. It does reduce carbon emissions here and there. It does save money in short terms. But when we clearly saw in the long term, recycling itself hurt our economy because it was so expensive, and we couldn't afford to do that annually, wasting $8 billion a year. Second, we saw how recycling was actually hurting individuals in terms of safety hazards, in terms of contamination. And last but not least, we understood how really the recycling was hurting our environment, the one thing it was not supposed to do. Combining all three elements together, we can see that as children and as perhaps young adults, recycling was supposed to be good. We really see how recycling in itself isn't that great. So next time you drink a bottle of water or perhaps a can of soda, maybe you shouldn't recycle it.